Well, good morning. Good to see everybody here today. So glad you're able to make it. Look, before I jump into this sermon, I want to tell you guys about something that's going on here that I'm pretty excited about. In fact, it may be the thing that's going on right now. Of all the things that are going on that are pretty exciting at Crossway Church, this right here may be at the top of the list for me. So it all happened, or it was started a couple weeks ago in our very first elders meeting of the year. And it was such a really, really good elders meeting. We talked about last year and how it went and how it finished and some of the lessons we learned from last year. And then we talked about some upcoming things that are coming up through the remainder of this year. And then we handled some current business. And just before the elders meeting was about to close, the chairperson looked at me and the rest of everybody, the rest of the elders, and said, look, guys, before we break up, I want to share with you something that's on my heart. And so we all sat up and we leaned in a little bit closer and listened hard. And he said, guys, when I knew that this was going to be my year to be the chairperson for this elder body, I started praying late last year in October or November. I started praying, God, what is it that you want me to be about as the chairperson of the elders? What is it you want me to focus on? What is it that you want us to do while I'm the chairperson? And he said, look, I started praying that prayer. And I prayed it, and at first, God didn't answer my prayer, so I just kept praying over time. And eventually, God gave me an answer to that prayer. And I wanted to share it with you guys. And so we all kind of sat up a little bit more even. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, guys, I think as elders, what we need to do is just take our prayer lives up a notch or two. He said, guys, I know that we all pray, and we pray on a regular basis, but I think it's important that we really ramp things up, that we really spend time, even more time, praying for our church, praying for our staff, praying for their families, praying for people that come and are part of our church family, and just everything that's going on. We need to bathe everything in prayer, and we just need to take it up a notch. And it was really cool to see the rest of the elders respond. One by one, we went around the table and we went, and I'm kind of paraphrasing again what people said, but they said, man, you would not believe it, but that's what God's been doing on my heart too. And there were even several of us that went, hey, didn't we have a conversation like this just a couple months ago and all this sort of stuff. It was just one of those neat moments, and I don't know if you've ever been in one of these, but it was a neat moment where we all just went, wow, this is definitely from God. This is God, and he's speaking to us, and we need to respond. And so what we did was we decided, hey, let's make a plan. Because we didn't want it to be one of those things that we talked about in elders meeting, we acknowledged God's movement, but we didn't do something about. And so we put a plan together, and the plan is really, it's pretty simple, but I think it's pretty powerful too. The plan is every Sunday morning at 8 o'clock, the elders are going to lead a prayer meeting over in the conference room down that hallway. And they've invited the deacons to join in, and so there's a rotation of deacons that are joining in with them. And the reason why I'm telling you about this is because I want to invite you to join them. I won't be able to go to those prayer meetings because I'll be tied up. I have responsibilities, other responsibilities I have to handle. But I want to invite you to join them. And here's why. I think for many of you in the room, it may be the single most important spiritual decision that you ever make your entire life, to join them in praying for our church. There truly is something powerful that happens when God's people get together and they stand before God and they just go, God, lead us, guide us, provide for us, protect us, and do something amongst us. And so I want to invite you to join them. There's actually this passage of scripture in the New Testament that reads like this: the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man or woman, obviously, avails much. Perhaps for many of us in this room, the very reason why our relationship with God is stale is because our prayer life is non-existent. So join up. I have this crazy dream about that whole thing. Like what I'm hoping happens is that so many of us join up that we outgrow that room and we have to find a bigger room. And then we get in that bigger room and then we outgrow that bigger room. And then we have to do it again and we have to do it again. And how cool would it be if the only room on campus, on our whole property that's big enough to hold the people who've come to pray is this room right here? How cool would that be? So look, guys, I want to invite you to join up 8 o'clock on Sunday mornings over in the conference room. And I'll just go ahead and start mapping out. In a few weeks, we're going to outgrow that, so we're already starting thinking about the next room we're going to join up in. But I'm so excited about that, and I hope you'll get involved. So back to the sermon, regularly planned sermon. For the last 3 weeks, we've been doing a sermon series entitled My Big Fat Mouth. And the reason why we've been doing this sermon series is pretty simple. Your words, my words, they matter. They're powerful. In the Old Testament, there was a guy named Solomon who said that there's the power of life and death in the tongue. Fast forward to Jesus in the New Testament, and Jesus said this. He said, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. In other words, there's something about our words that's powerful. It betrays us. It reveals what's going on inside. And then if you fast forward a little bit more to James in the New Testament, he said this. He said, our tongue is kind of like a rudder on a ship, on a massive, massive ship. It's a small part of the ship, but it has incredible power to steer that ship any direction that it wants it to go. And our words are like that. Our words steer our lives. But they don't just steer our lives, they actually steer other people's lives too. And sometimes it steers things in a direction we want it to go, and sometimes it steers things in a direction that we don't want it to go. Sometimes we're aware of the power of our words and aware of the power of our tongue, and sometimes we're just completely oblivious. But regardless, your words matter, and so do mine. Words are powerful. So in week 1, we talked about complaining, and then week 2, we talked about criticism, and then last week we talked about gossip. And if I were to put a title on what I want to talk about today, here's what I would title it. I said this, you heard that. Now, I don't know about you, but more times than I can count in my life, I have experienced this reality. I said something, and then somebody heard something totally different. And I found myself more often in times than I can count, just where people said, they responded to something I said, and they said, well, you said this, and I'm like, I didn't say that. It's happened literally in every arena of my life, but the area it's probably happened the most is in the area of my marriage. One of the earliest times I can remember it happening was about year 3 in our marriage. When Stacy and I got married, we had this plan. We had what we called a 5-year plan. We said, look, for 5 years, let's just do us. Let's learn to jihad and work together and flow together and do all that sort of stuff, and let's enjoy each other. And then when we get to year 5, that's when we'll start having kids. So we started out, we got married, and we're working the plan. And the longer it's just her and me, the more and more and more and more I like it. Well, I get to about year 3, and I sense that this thing is growing strongly inside of me, where I start to think to myself, man, I could live the rest of my life this way. Well, about that time, I had some friends of ours in the church that we were part of, they started having babies. And right off the bat, I learned that babies are jerks. Like, they change everything. I mean, they cry all the time. They don't sleep when they're supposed to. You know, they change your whole schedule. And then on top of that, they poop a lot, which is ridiculous. And they just, and I was like, oh, man. And as I started to watch my friends, I realized if things like this keep happening, this feeling keeps happening inside of me, it's just going to grow. And when we get to year 5, I'm going to be absolutely against having kids. And Stacy's going to be in a place where she's like, it's time, let's do this. And I thought, that's probably not a reality I want to live. So one day, randomly out of the blue, I gave her no warning whatsoever. I just looked at her, and these are the exact words that I said. Hey, if we don't start having kids soon, I don't think I'm going to want to have them at all. Now, what I was trying to tell my wife is, look, there's this thing going on inside of me that's growing, and I think we probably need to talk about this, because I think it could take us to a place where we're not on the same page anymore. But what she heard was, you just gave me an ultimatum. You just said that if we don't start having kids now, like maybe even start trying in this very moment, which I was not opposed to, then you're out no matter what. And I went, wait, that's not what I told you. But no matter what I tried to tell her, she was certain that's exactly what I just did. And of course, it launched us into this big, huge fight. All because I said this, and she heard that. Now, it happened again. Well, it's happened a lot, but it happened again a couple weeks ago. Just before Thanksgiving, my wife bought this, and I don't even know what to call it, this big, huge seat thing that has a special frame, and it takes up a lot of space. But she got it on a steal of a deal, and she wanted to stick it in our kids', we have a little room that we kind of mark off of their playroom, so we try to quarantine all their toys to one spot, which never works, but we try anyway. So she put it in there, and she got it for a steal of a deal, and the kids loved it. And she was excited and happy, and she was happy, I was happy, and everything was going fine until Thanksgiving rolled around. And my nephews and niece all came over, and they, all 5 of them, along with all of my kids, got in that thing. Well, it's, pretty safe to say that the thing wasn't designed for that kind of weight. So it breaks. My wife then takes it apart, and she puts leaves one part where it is, and puts another part in another part of the house. And she just says, well, look, I saw this on Pinterest, which, come on, nothing you try on Pinterest works. I don't know why it even ends up on Pinterest. That crap doesn't work. Anyway, side note. She goes, look, I saw this on Pinterest. I think I can fix this. Don't worry. So we have this big, huge piece here. We have this big, huge piece here. And week after week after week after week after week passes by. And nothing happens. It doesn't get fixed. And it doesn't look like there's any chance of it getting fixed. So a couple weeks ago, I looked at her, and I was so fed up with the clutter, because I can't stand clutter. And I just thought, well, something has to be done about this. So I went to her, and here's what I said. Hey, if we don't fix this in the next couple weeks, I'm just going to take it down to the curb and throw it away. Now, what I was trying to tell her is, look, there's a number of ways we can resolve this problem. You can fix it, and I'll watch the kids, or we'll try to do this thing together, or we could just throw it away. But the clutter and the you know what I mean? It has to go. That's what I meant to say. What she heard was, you said we, but you meant you. You meant me. You're saying that I'm screwing up and that this thing is all wrong and I'm a terrible mom and I'm a terrible wife and I'm like going, what's happening right now? I just want this thing to get dealt with. And I mean, it spiraled out of control. And to this day, she's still mad at me about it. And I'm like, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Do I have to put my hand on a Bible or what? That's not what I meant. But I said this, and you heard that. And I'm guessing you've had quite a few of those moments too, where words came out of our big fat mouth, and for whatever reason, chaos ensued. And so this morning, what I want to do is I want to spend just a few minutes talking about how to avoid miscommunication. If there's anything true about communication, and you guys already know this, it's this. Communication is not just about what's said, it's also about what's heard. The whole point of communication is to communicate thoughts and emotions and feelings and opinions and ideas and all sort of stuff like that. And the primary vehicle we use is words. We sometimes use other things also, but the whole point is to do that, right? And when you and I try to communicate, when we try to communicate ideas, thoughts, opinions, feelings, all that sort of stuff, what it does is it creates fertile ground for misunderstanding and miscommunication. When we try to do that, miscommunication happens when the listener, for whatever reason, doesn't understand what the speaker is trying to say. It happens all the time. Dale Carnegie once said that 90% of all workplace issues can be summed up as miscommunication. And I think Dale Carnegie's probably right. But I think he's probably right about that being true in other arenas too. I would venture to say that perhaps 90% of all marriage problems can be summed up as miscommunication. Perhaps 90% of all friendship issues or parenting issues. Miscommunication, it's important that we understand that miscommunication has caused all kinds of problems in the world. Wars have literally been started because of miscommunication. Marriages that started off so promising and two people were in a hot pursuit of each other and in the pursuit of happily ever after, marriages have literally crumbled because of miscommunication. There are families that used to enjoy each other, used to love each other, used to look for ways to get together and spend time with each other, that no longer even talk to each other because of miscommunication. Business ventures have failed and fallen apart because of miscommunication. Business partners, two people that were tight, close friends who decided, let's go into business together. And it looked like it was a match made in heaven. They no longer talk to each other, and they're finding ways to sue each other, probably many times because of miscommunication. So this morning, I want to talk about how do we avoid that stuff. And as we do, I want to take a look at a verse that kind of helps us with it. It's a verse that you're probably familiar with. Perhaps many of you memorized it as a young kid. I memorized it as a young kid. It was a verse that we used a lot around my house and around the church that I was a part of growing up. And you should be familiar with it if you've been to any of our sermon series, because I've actually used it several times. But it's a verse that's actually a part of a letter that Paul wrote to a group of Christians in a city called Ephesus. It was a group of Christians that were part of a church that Paul actually started, and they still look to him for leadership. And so in Ephesians chapter 4, he sits down and he writes to them about how to communicate. But not merely how to communicate, he actually writes to them to help them understand how to communicate well. And here's what he said. He said, do not let. And I want to kind of stop here with this word let, because I think this is a very strategic word on behalf of Paul. See, I think when Paul uses this word, what he's trying to help us understand that the words that we use are a choice. Every single word that comes out of our mouth is a choice that we make. Paul wants to be abundantly clear. Look, when it comes to communication, everything that you say is a decision that you make. You're not a victim. You're not a victim to the way that you're made. You're not a victim to your personality. You're not a victim to your circumstances. Well, you don't understand. I found myself in here. You're not a victim to, well, I just needed to vent. Every word that comes out of your mouth is a choice. And Paul wants to be abundantly clear about that. He wants us to understand communication is a choice. And then he says any, which I also think is an important word. Because Paul here could have said some, he could have said most. But he says any. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths. Don't let any unwholesome talk, any, come out of your mouths. Now, when I was growing up, I was led to believe, or I chose to believe, that when Paul said this, that what he meant was, you're not supposed to cuss, you shouldn't call people names, you shouldn't tell crude or sexual jokes. That's really what I thought this meant. But what Paul's trying to communicate here is actually so much bigger than that. It may actually include that, but it's actually so much bigger than that, because what Paul's saying is he's saying, look, any words that don't bring about wholeness, any words that don't make the hearer whole. So what Paul's saying is he's saying, don't say words unless they make somebody whole emotionally. Don't say words unless it makes somebody whole spiritually. Don't say words unless it makes somebody whole intellectually. The bottom line of what Paul's saying in that phrase is he's saying, look, if it's not helpful and if it's not healthy, just don't say it. He continues, because he's not done, he says, but only what is helpful for building others up, and I don't want you to miss this part, that's why I highlighted it, according to their needs. It's as if Paul kind of says, oh, and by the way, nothing unhealthy, nothing unhelpful, and by the way, when you communicate, it needs to be on the terms of the listener. It needs to be oriented around the way that the listener is made, and the way that the listener thinks, and the way that the listener understands. Paul wants to be clear that helpful, wholesome conversation happens when the person who is speaking takes into full consideration the listener. It's on the listener's terms. He continues, that it may benefit those who listen. So Paul takes a second opportunity and says, oh, by the way, just in case you missed it, it's not about the person speaking. It's about the person listening. If I were to sum up what Paul's trying to communicate here, I'd say this. We must learn to communicate in their language if we're going to love others well. You see, we've been called by God. We've been called by God to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that neighbor category includes a whole host of people. It includes our spouse, it includes our children, it includes our parents, it includes our coworkers, it includes our boss, it includes our neighbor, it includes our in-laws, and every single person that we encounter. And we are called to love those people. And if we are going to love those people well, what Paul wants us to understand is that we have to find a way to communicate in their language on their terms. Now, right about now, I'm hoping that there are a series of questions that are going through your mind that you're wrestling with. And the one that I hope you're wrestling with the most is this question. If it's supposed to be according to their needs, if it's supposed to be according to their language, how do I know what their language is? And the answer to that question is something called temperaments. Maybe you understand what that is, or maybe you don't, but I think perhaps the best way to illustrate it is with this chart right here. About thousands of years ago, there was a guy named, his name just went gone. Anyway, this is this old dude, really old dude, probably had a beard. I'll remember it later. My mind just went totally blank. Anyway, he was the first, Hippocrates, I think he was. Hippocrates was the very first person to observe temperaments. Now, the way he did it was he watched people and the way that they normally behave, and he noticed that people consistently fell into certain camps or certain groupings. He called them quadrants or whatever, and he gave them names, and these are the names that he gave them: sanguine, choleric, phlegmatic, and melancholics. Now, if those sound like weird names, it's because technically when he gave these names represent a bodily fluid, which is super gross. But the reason why they represent a bodily fluid is because back in Hippocrates' day, and him and his contemporaries, they thought that the reason why these temperaments existed had something to do with body fluids. Now, since Hippocrates' day, we've obviously learned more. There's thousands upon thousands of years of research and learning on this front, and we've learned that temperaments now happen because of the way that God designs people. Now, a few years back, there was another person by the name of Kathleen Edelman who came along, and she wrote a communication resource called I Said This, You Heard That. And she said, well, look, these names are a mouthful. They're hard to pronounce. They're hard to remember. So let's just use colors. And she has these colors that represent temperaments. And here's the thing. Every single person in this room falls into one of these temperaments. In fact, the personality profiles that you take, by the way, Myers-Briggs and all those other ones, they actually use all of this stuff as the foundation upon which they build their personality profiles and their tests. So, but every one of us fall in one of these four quadrants. And every person that you engage with also falls in one of those quadrants. And here's why that's important. Because the temperament shapes the way people hear and what people say. It does it for every one of us. So let me help you try to figure out what temperament you might be and what color you might be. The top two temperaments, yellow and red, are extroverts. And the bottom two are introverts. Now, to be clear, when I say extrovert and introvert, I'm not using it in terms of, well, normally we say extroverts are people that like people and they enjoy being around people and they get energy when they're around people. And then we say introverts are people that really don't like people and they're hermits by nature and they just want to be by themselves all the time. That's not actually how I'm using these terms. I'm using these terms in communication, in terms of communication. So this has to do with thought processes. So extroverts, these top two, these are people who process out. Their thoughts and feelings go out. When they're working through thoughts and feelings and emotions and ideas, thoughts go out. So they speak before they think about it. Sometimes we describe these people as people who have no filter. They just kind of blah, and then they work through whatever comes out. Now these bottom people, and by the way, I'm a red shirt, red, get it? Okay. And what that means for me, because this is the way my thought processes work, is for the people who are closest to me, they see this happen all the time. As I'm thinking through and working through things, I say all kinds of stuff. Some of it I don't even think I agree with as I'm saying it. But what I'm doing is I'm trying to work through everything. So those are the top two. The bottom, introverts, these are people that thoughts and feelings and emotions go inward. They collect all of it, and they think about it, and they wrestle with it, and they process it inside, and they marinate on it, and they don't even talk about it, or they don't want to talk about it until the whole idea is fully baked and they've fully wrapped their minds around it. So those are the two things. Also, on top of that, the people here on the right are people-oriented, and the two over here are task-oriented. Now, when I say people-oriented, yellow and green, I don't mean that they don't get stuff done. Yellow and green, I know all kinds of yellow and green temperament people that are extraordinarily productive people. But it means that they have a people orientation to the way that they're made. Now, on this side, people are task-oriented. Now, when I say task-oriented, it's important that you understand that just because they're red or blue, it doesn't mean that they don't like people or love people. Although I do know some people that don't like people, and that's a different issue altogether. But they're happiest when they are getting stuff done, right? These people are happiest on this side when they're just around people and they're engaging people. And that's just the way that God made us. So these folks right here, extroverted, people-oriented, introverted, people-oriented, extroverted, task-oriented, extroverted, introverted. Dang, I did that wrong again. I don't know what's happening right now. Introverted, task-oriented. And that's the quadrant. And every one of us fall into that. Now, before I move on and tell you why this information is important, again, I want you to know that every person that you encounter falls into one of these quadrants, and it shapes the way that they speak and the words that they need to hear. Also, you need to know there is no quadrant that is better than the other. There's no temperament. Reds aren't better than greens or yellows or blues. Blues aren't better than any of them, and so on and so forth. This is just the way that God made us. Now, each temperament comes with a list of strengths and weaknesses, but no temperament is better than the other. So with this in mind, how many of you think that you know what temperament you are? You got an idea? All right. Just out of curiosity, how many of you think you're red? Okay. How many are blue? Green? Yellow. Woohoo, right? Yellow. So here's what I want to do. Based on this information, and by the way, this information really will help us to avoid miscommunication if we apply it correctly. I want to give you 3 keys to the words that you choose that will help you to avoid miscommunication. The first one is this: your temperament determines the words that you speak. The temperament that you're in determines the words that you speak. For instance, yellows speak the language of people and fun. They just people-oriented. They like to have fun. Not that other people don't. This is a certain orientation in their life. Greens, calm and harmony. Blues, perfection and order. And reds, power and control. So for instance, from a very practical standpoint, yellows, when they speak, they often speak with animated, fun, and people-oriented words. So if you're yellow, you probably use words like, that's awesome, or that's great, or that sounds like fun, or who's going to be there? Can we invite more people? That's yellow. Yellows often speak with animated, fun, and people-oriented words. Now red, people who are red often speak with bold, confident, and controlling words. They say things like, let's go, now, hurry up. And you feel like when they say it, like they might slit your throat if you don't do it. Like I might die if I refuse whatever command's happening right now in this moment. But reds, this is what they do. This is what I do sometimes. I speak with bold, confident, and controlling words. And those of you who are parents and you are red, I guarantee in the last week you said something like that to your kids. Hurry up, let's go now. All right, so the next color. If you're blue, you often speak with detailed, judgmental, and thoughtful words. So if you're here today and you're blue, here's the type of words you might say. Is it safe? That doesn't seem safe to me. Are you sure you can trust them? Or, hey, you know what? I've been thinking, and if you're here today and your parent, you had a blue parent, when you wanted to go somewhere, here's how it worked. you knew you were going to have to work through about 50 questions before you got to any kind of answer. Okay, so where do you want to go again? You want to go, okay, you're going to go out to eat, all right. How are you going to get there? When are you going to leave? Who's going to be in the car? Who's driving the car? Who's sitting where in the car? So when you get there, you want to go out to eat. What restaurant do you want to sit in? Now, where exactly in the restaurant do you think that you're going to sit? Okay, now, you're going to sit next to who at the table? Okay, you're going to this restaurant. What are you planning on ordering? Are you ordering, because this is you normally order this, is this what you order? Okay, so when you guys get done, who's praying, by the way, before everything? Because we're Christians and we pray before we eat. And then, okay, so then that's going to happen and you're going to pray, it's going to happen. All right, so look, then just question after question. And the reason why that happens is because your mama or your daddy was blue. Often speaks with detailed, judgmental, and thoughtful words. If you're green, you often speak with easygoing, unenthusiastic, and patient words. You say things like, that's fine, whatever, no problem, no worries, just smooth sailor. But listen, your temperament shapes the words that you speak. It shapes the words that you use. But there's something else you need to know. Your temperament dictates the words that you need to hear. It absolutely does. For instance, take a look at this chart with me. Every single person, whatever temperament you are, you come with innate needs. These are needs that drive your behavior and your decision making and your way that your mind works. It also drives the way that you communicate and what you long for in communication. And this happens whether you know it or not, and it's been happening your whole life. And here's what your needs are. If you're yellow, you need approval, acceptance, attention, and affection. So if you're a boss and you have somebody who's yellow that works for you, you know, they wonder, are they just a cog in your wheel? Or do they actually matter? Does he or she, do they care about me? Because they have these needs. They also need to know, hey, are they pleased with my work? Do they think I'm doing a good job? If you're green, you need harmony, worthiness, lack of stress, and respect. They need to know that their thoughts matter, that their opinions, that you want to know what their opinion is. If you're red, you need loyalty, sense of control, appreciation, and credit for work. Reds want to know, do they got my back? Are they going to stand up with me? Are they going to stand up for me? Blue, they need safety, sensitivity, support, and space and silence. We have 2 people on our staff team that are blues, and they are hard blues, like full tilt blue. And if there's anything that I've learned about them, one of the worst things I can do as a coworker, as a teammate, is to barge into their space unannounced while they're thinking and working. Because for them, they need space and silence. And when I interrupt, it communicates something. But we all have these innate needs. And I think one of the best things you might take away from this whole thing is to take whatever temperament you are, write the words down that are your needs, and then put teeth to it. Just put write it out and so that you know exactly what you are. But look, your temperament shapes the words that you need to hear. Which brings me to my third point. Understanding the temperaments literally changes every conversation. It changes every conversation. Let me explain how this works at my home. I have a daughter. My oldest daughter, Hannah, is yellow, which means she's people-oriented. She speaks the language of people and fun, and she's an extrovert in her thoughts, just like me. So she has a thought, and before she even processes it, it goes blah. Now, I'm a red, which means I'm task-oriented. Now, the fact that truth shades the way that we think about the weekends. When Hannah thinks about the weekend, because she's people-oriented, and she speaks the language of people and fun, you know what she's thinking about? All the things that she's going to go do and all the people that she's going to spend time with. I'm task-oriented, which you know what that means? Here's how I think about the weekend. I can do this, and we can do this, and we can get this done, and we can get this done, and we can get this done. I think about all the things on my to-do list I get to knock out on the weekend. Needless to say, those two things can create a collision. Now, when I understand the temperaments, I understand the way that I'm made, and I understand the way that she's made. When I lean into it, here's how the conversation goes. And it doesn't go this way all the time, but when I'm getting it right, here's how it goes. Hey, Hannah, we have a couple things that we have to do this weekend. We'll do it first thing on Saturday morning so we can get it out of the way quickly. And it won't take us all day. Don't worry. You're not going to have to do it by yourself. It's a team sport. We're all going to do it all at the same time. And once we get this stuff done, look, I'll be happy to take you wherever or help you go and do and spend time with whoever it is you want to go and do and spend time with. And when I leverage the temperaments, you know what Hannah hears in that moment? Daddy loves me. My wife is green. And when I leverage the temperaments, here's how the conversation goes. Hey, babe, I have a list of things that I think really need to get done. But look, I don't want to take up all your time this weekend. I don't want to force what I want to do on you. So would you mind picking maybe one or two of them? And we'll just do that. And then that way we can kind of make some progress and everything. When I'm leveraging the temperaments, I understand my wife, she has some needs. There are things that she needs to hear. She needs to hear that her opinions matter, that I respect her. So when I'm leveraging the temperaments, it changes the conversation, and I find ways and times to pull her aside if I'm doing it right and say, hey, babe, look, I want you to know I see you. I see everything that you do for our family. I know you make all kinds of sacrifices, and I'm pretty sure I'm not even aware of all of them or how much it costs you. But I want you to know I see you, and we're lucky to have you. Thanks for everything that you do. And you know what my wife hears? TJ loves me. Because I'm speaking into her temperament. I have another daughter who's red, just like me, which means she has the need for a sense of control in her life, a sense of control over things. And when I leverage the temperaments, what it does is it makes me go to her and go, hey, look, we got to do this thing. But you're really good at this. So why don't you tell us how to do it, and we'll do it your way. Or it causes me sometimes to go to her and say, hey, you're really good at this. Why don't you decide what to do? And while you're at it, why don't you teach your brother, because he needs some real work. But understanding the temperaments changes every conversation. Literally every conversation, when we understand it and when we leverage it. One of the things that it causes us to be able to do is it causes us to be able to pause. Like sometimes when miscommunication happens, or oftentimes what happens is people go into react mode. We get angry and we say and we do and we rrr. But when we understand the temperaments, it gives us permission to pause and go, wait, why is this happening? What am I missing? What's going on here? And then it gives us the permission, the ability to give somebody grace. And go, you know what? This is probably because I'm communicating in a way that they don't understand, or they're communicating in a way that I understand, but it has something to do with God, the way God wired them, the way God wired me. And so I'm just going to choose not to be upset by it. Instead, I'm going to choose to work through it. You realize that our lives don't have to be sabotaged by misunderstanding. There's better available for us. So what I want to do is I want you guys to watch this video. We want to show you a video, and I'm sure there's still some of you are trying to figure out or understand temperaments, and I understand that today is a little bit like drinking from a fire hose, and perhaps you got some of it, perhaps you didn't. But I want you to watch this video. This video will help you to get a little bit better understanding of the temperaments and how the temperaments work. So listen, let me encourage everybody. I think there are 3 steps that you can take based on what we talked about today. The first step is a step that I think everybody in the room can take, and I think it'll help you if you'll take it to avoid miscommunication in your life. When you leave today, there'll be members of our hospitality team at all the doors that'll be holding cards like this. And there's one of these cards for every temperament. And if you kind of have an idea of what your temperament is, grab it from them and take it with you. It'll explain a little bit more about your temperament. It'll talk about how you're uniquely wired. And on the back, it'll actually have some steps that you can take to use your words better in light of your temperament, to communicate love to people around you, to avoid miscommunication. But that's a step that all of us can take. And I think if that's all you can do, that'd be a good step for you in the right direction. Also, another step you could take based on what we talked about today is you could actually go online and order Kathleen Edelman's book, I Said This, You Heard That. It'll cost you about $17 on Amazon. And you can go through the whole thing, it's by yourself. And I'm telling you, I barely scratched the surface today. I really absolutely did. There's so much more to learn. There's so much more information I wanted to share, but I knew there was only so much that people could process all at once. So you can go through the book by yourself. Or the third step you can do is you can take and go through the book with a group of people. There's actually a growth group that I'm going to be leading, but we're probably going to grow to the point where I'm going to have 1 or 2 other people also leading. We may have to split up, but it's actually on the study. I said this, you heard that. And I did this study last semester with a group of people who at the end said, look, this is the best study. This has been the most helpful study I've done at our church in a long, long, long time. In fact, there were people who came to that study whose marriages, they were struggling to work together and get along. And at the end, they left the study going, oh, I finally understand and I finally know how to move forward. So if you're interested, sign up for the group. You can sign up for the group at crosswaychurch.com or crossway.news. But listen, I'm pleading with you, don't let miscommunication sabotage your life. It doesn't have to be that way.